Marcus Johnson accidentally discovered that his home Wi-Fi had been hacked, but when he changed the password, his neighbor Linda called the police, suspecting him of something shady. During the investigation, the police uncovered a chilling truth. The real person spying on the entire neighborhood was Linda's own nephew. Late Friday night, the Springfield, Illinois neighborhood was cloaked in silence, with only the dim glow of streetlights stretching over empty roads. Inside house number 17, Marcus Johnson, 34 years old, a remote working software developer, sat in front of his computer, frowning in frustration. His Wi-Fi had been acting strangely. Video calls kept freezing, and his home security cameras flickered at odd intervals. With the sharp instincts of a tech-savvy professional, Marcus checked the list of connected devices, and his stomach dropped. Springfield Home 01, a name he didn't recognize, was still actively using his network. Someone was accessing his Wi-Fi without permission. Without hesitation, he decided to reset his password immediately. He stepped onto the front porch, where the signal was stronger, the glow of his phone screen illuminating his face. His fingers moved swiftly, entering the new credentials. Unbeknownst to him, a pair of cold, watchful eyes followed his every move from across the street. Linda Harrison, 50 years old, a woman who always kept an eye on things she didn't understand, narrowed her gaze. Why was Marcus standing outside so late, glued to his phone? It looked suspicious. A deep unease crept over her. Before she could reconsider, Linda grabbed her phone and dialed 911, her voice urgent. "There's a man outside his house, lurking around with his phone. He's doing something. I don't know what, but it doesn't look right. Can you send an officer over?" The silence of the Springfield, Illinois neighborhood was shattered by the wail of sirens. Red and blue lights flashed across darkened windows, illuminating the empty street as the police cruiser screeched to a halt in front of Marcus Johnson's house. Two officers stepped out, their presence commanding and unwavering. Detective Robert Hayes, tall, broad-shouldered, with a face as cold as steel and a voice that carried undeniable authority. Officer Emily Carter, smaller in stature but razor-sharp, always on high alert. Flashlights clicked on, their beams slicing through the night, landing squarely on Marcus. The sudden brightness made him instinctively raise a hand to shield his eyes. The darkness retreated, leaving only the weight of suspicion hanging in the air. "Hands where we can see them," Hayes ordered, his voice firm, unwavering. Marcus blinked, caught off guard. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice groggy with confusion. "I was just changing my Wi-Fi password." But before he could say another word, a sharp voice cut through the air from across the street. Linda Harrison, disheveled and wide-eyed, rushed out of her house, pointing directly at Marcus as if she had just caught him in the middle of something sinister. "I know he's up to something," she shrieked. "Check his phone. He's hacking something. I just know it." Marcus clenched his jaw, anger bubbling just beneath the surface. This was his home. He had done nothing wrong, but he also knew one wrong move and this situation could spiral out of control. He exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay calm. "Fine," he said, his voice tight. "I'll show you my network settings." Detective Hayes exchanged a glance with Officer Carter, then gave a brief nod. Carter stepped forward, her sharp eyes scanning the screen, and then her expression suddenly darkened. Her entire body tensed. "Wait a minute," she muttered, fingers swiping across the screen, her brows furrowing deeper. Detective Hayes took a step closer. "What is it?" Carter's voice was low, serious. "This isn't just someone stealing Wi-Fi." She turned the phone slightly so they could see what she was looking at. Marcus followed her gaze, and his stomach dropped. The unknown device, Springfielder Home 01, wasn't just connected to his network. It was linked to multiple security cameras throughout the neighborhood. The air grew thick, heavy with unease. A chill ran down Marcus's spine. Someone wasn't just stealing Wi-Fi, someone was watching them. Linda, who had been so certain of Marcus's guilt, suddenly froze in place. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Detective Hayes turned sharply back to Marcus, his tone now sharper, more urgent. "How long have you known about this?" Marcus swallowed hard, his pulse pounding in his ears. This was worse than he'd imagined. "I just found out tonight," he admitted. "I thought someone was freeloading off my internet, but now—" He trailed off, his throat dry. "This is something else entirely." Officer Carter looked up, her expression grim. "Not just something else," she corrected. "This might be a predator." Detective Hayes reached for his radio, his jaw set like stone. "We need to check this immediately. If someone has infiltrated multiple security systems, we're not dealing with a hacker." He paused, locking eyes with Marcus. "We're dealing with a stalker." Linda began to tremble. Marcus gripped his phone tighter, a sinking feeling settling in his gut. Someone wasn't just watching him, they were watching the entire neighborhood. Marcus stared at the screen, his pulse pounding in his ears as streams of data flooded his system. This wasn't just a strange Wi-Fi connection. Whoever was behind it was accessing live feeds from multiple home security cameras across the neighborhood. A deep, unshakable dread settled in his gut. Someone wasn't just stealing his internet. They were watching people inside their homes. His hands trembled slightly as he clicked on one of the live streams. The screen flickered. Then, the image appeared. A dimly lit living room, the only source of light coming from a flickering late-night TV. In the corner of the room, a shadowy figure stood perfectly still. On the couch, a woman lay asleep, completely unaware that just a few feet away, someone was silently watching her. Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. This wasn't just a hacker messing around. This was an intruder. Someone was inside that house. And then a scream tore through the air. "Oh my God, that's my house!" Linda shrieked, her entire body trembling as she pointed at the screen. The living room on the screen was hers. The woman on the couch was her. And someone was inside her home at that very moment. Detective Hayes didn't hesitate. He grabbed his radio, his voice sharp and commanding. "I need a tactical team here immediately. Possible active intruder, high-risk situation, requesting immediate backup." Linda stood frozen, clutching her chest, gasping for breath as waves of panic surged through her. Marcus was still in shock, but his instincts kicked in. He kept scanning through the data, his eyes darting across the screen. But before he could dig any deeper, a high-pitched alarm blared from his security system. Beep, beep, beep. One of Marcus's motion sensors had just been triggered. The room went deadly silent. Then, a sound echoed from the back of the house. The back door creaked open, not kicked in, not forced, but slowly, as if someone was standing in the darkness and had just stepped inside. Darkness blanketed the house, swallowing every corner in eerie silence. The air felt thick, heavy, as if time itself had stopped. The only sounds were Linda's shaky breathing and the rapid thumping of Marcus's heart. The police had no time to waste. Flashlights snapped on, cutting through the void, their beams slicing across the furniture, casting long shifting shadows against the walls. Detective Hayes and Officer Carter unholstered their weapons, stepping in cautiously. Each footstep echoed against the hardwood floor, steady but tense. Marcus followed behind, gripping his phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. It felt as if the entire house was holding its breath, waiting for the worst to unfold. And then, a sound. Software. Slow. Careful. Someone was moving. By instinct, Hayes whipped around, aiming his gun at the darkened back hallway. "Come out now!" His voice was firm, unwavering. No response. Silence. But not the kind of silence that meant nothing was there. This was the silence of someone waiting, watching, calculating. Marcus gritted his teeth, every nerve in his body electrified. This wasn't just paranoia. There was someone inside. And then it happened in a flash. A shadow erupted from the darkness. Fast. Too fast. "Stop!" The officers turned, weapons raised, but it was already too late. The figure, lean but lightning quick, darted through the hallway, vanishing past them in a blur. A loud noise echoed from the back door. The intruder was gone. Everything had happened too fast to process. Detective Hayes rushed toward the exit, but by the time he reached the door, the night had already swallowed the figure whole. A gust of cold air swept into the house through the open door, sending an icy chill down Linda's spine as she wrapped her arms around herself. Marcus stood frozen, his entire body rigid with shock. A deep primal fear crept into his bones. Someone had been watching them, someone had invaded his home, and someone was still out there, lurking in the darkness. The air inside Marcus's house felt heavier, thick with unspoken dread. The darkness outside was nothing compared to the fear lurking inside. The intruder had vanished, but he hadn't gone far. He was still watching, waiting. Marcus gritted his teeth, forcing himself to focus as his eyes locked onto his laptop screen. He couldn't let this person slip away. His fingers flew across the keyboard, reopening the network logs. This intruder had hacked into his Wi-Fi, accessed his cameras, spied on his neighbors, and maybe even more. But he wasn't just some random hacker sitting miles away. The final results sent ice through Marcus's veins. The IP address wasn't from an external server. It wasn't from a nameless cybercriminal hiding behind layers of encryption. It was from right here, in this very neighborhood. Marcus felt a deep, sickening chill crawl down his spine as his eyes locked onto the final destination. It was coming from a house just a few doors down, Jason Miller's house. No way. Linda's voice ripped through the room. Her eyes were wide in disbelief, her trembling hands pointing at the address on the screen as if she could somehow make it disappear. It can't be him. He's just a kid. He spends all day on his computer, but he would never do something like this. But the truth was staring them in the face. Detective Hayes didn't need to see more. His eyes darkened, his expression steeled. "We're moving in." His voice was low, firm and absolute. Officer Carter didn't hesitate. She grabbed her radio, her voice tense, every syllable precise. "We have a suspect, requesting backup, moving to the location now." There was no time to waste. They rushed to the patrol car. Linda still stood frozen, her face a storm of shock and heartbreak. She whispered more to herself than to anyone else. "It can't be. Jason wouldn't do this. He wouldn't." But Detective Hayes wasn't waiting for denials. The police cruiser roared to life, tires screeching against the pavement as they raced toward Jason's house. The answers awaited them, and with it, a truth more terrifying than any of them were ready for. The police cruiser screeched to a halt in front of the small house at the end of the street. Red and blue lights flickered against the dark windows. The house stood still, eerily silent. Detective Hayes and Officer Carter stepped out, hands near their weapons, eyes sharp and focused. Jason Miller's house loomed in the darkness, quiet as a waiting trap. Knock, knock, knock. Detective Hayes pounded against the wooden door, his voice firm, unwavering. "Police, open up." Silence, no movement, no response. Just the wind howling through the trees, sending a creeping unease through the night. "Open the door. Police." Still nothing. Hayes and Carter exchanged a quick glance. They couldn't afford to wait. Bam! The door burst open under Hayes' powerful kick, hinges groaning in protest. From the end of the hallway, a faint glow flickered, a computer screen still running. Marcus stood frozen at the doorway, his throat dry. They rushed inside. In a dimly lit room, Jason Miller sat frozen in his chair. Before him, dozens of computer screens glowed, displaying live feeds from security cameras all over the neighborhood. Living rooms, kitchens, hallways, bedrooms, invisible eyes watching his unsuspecting neighbors, every second of every day. Jason slowly turned around, his eyes wide, pupils blown out in fear. Detective Hayes took a step forward, his gaze cold and cutting. "What have you done?" Jason swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. I just wanted to see if I could hack Wi-Fi, but then I saw the security cameras and I couldn't stop." Officer Carter slammed her hand on the desk, her voice sharp with anger. "How many people have you been watching?" Jason shuddered, his head dropping. His voice was barely audible. I don't know. I lost count." A heavy, dead silence filled the room. Linda stood in the doorway, her face pale, eyes glistening with unshed tears. She shook her head, disbelief etched into every line on her face. "No, Jason, you couldn't have done this." But Jason had no excuses left. The sound of handcuffs clicking echoed through the room. Linda collapsed onto a chair, burying her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. As the police led Jason out of the house, Marcus stared at him, his expression a mixture of anger and disgust. Jason had been watching them all, and if Marcus hadn't uncovered the truth in time, it could have been so much worse. Morning had arrived, but the air in the neighborhood remained heavy, thick with unspoken words. The first rays of sunlight peeked through rooftops, but no one had slept after the horrors of the night before. The police escorted Jason out of the house, his wrists bound tightly behind his back. He didn't resist, didn't speak, only kept his head down, his eyes still clouded with the darkness that had consumed him. Linda stood frozen on the pavement, her face pale, her body trembling. She watched her nephew being taken away, struggling to grasp the reality of it all. Jason, the boy she had raised, protected, and trusted, had been the monster lurking in the shadows all along. Marcus stepped forward, his footsteps slow and deliberate. He stopped in front of Linda. They locked eyes, one filled with guilt and regret, the other with quiet disappointment. Linda Hahn shivered, her lips quivering as she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was wrong. I accused the wrong person." The words hung in the air, heavy and irreversible. Marcus didn't reply immediately. He let the silence weigh down on them, let Linda feel the full weight of her mistake. Finally he spoke, his voice low, firm, cutting like a blade. "You weren't just wrong. You put me in danger." Marcus Stam held her gaze, unwavering. "While the real threat was right inside your own home." Linda bit her lip, tears slipping down her face. "Next time," Marcus continued, his voice quieter but sharper, Check the facts before you judge someone. It wasn't a request. It was a lesson, a warning. Detective Hayes had been watching from a distance. He stepped forward, a rare look of respect crossing his face. If it weren't for you, Hayes admitted, we might have never uncovered the truth. Marcus Hasha simply nodded. He didn't need thanks. He didn't need praise. He just needed justice. The police cruiser rolled away, taking Jason Miller with it. Linda D. remained rooted in place, standing alone in the middle of the street. She watched the car until it disappeared,